So thank you so much for inviting me. It wasn't really inviting me, it was inviting someone from the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks, but I always leap in and get here. Mainly because what they felt at the centre was that this is an assessors conference, and I do lots of work with the centre. In fact, I'm the jack of all trades over there, but I'm also an assessor. And so part of that is bringing that feeling of our comradeship, being part of the group and the team. Because as assessors, we have very special roles. So as you can see as well, I'm the old lady, so I'm very easy to remember because my name is A. Senior. I have all those houses across Canada. You know, you see my name everywhere. A Senior's residence, A Senior's house. So what it means is that you can't forget me. So if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with me at any stage. I'm also dithering here because as I get older, I lose height, so I've got my 5-inch heels on. So if I fall off the stage, okay, rescue me. So firstly, I'm delighted to be here, and bonjour tout le monde. Part of what you'll recognise is that very British accent. Been in Canada for more years than I possibly want to say. But it's still that immigrant country. I remember back my immigrant experiences when I came in many years ago, and the feeling of being an immigrant in a country where it's a challenge. Even when you speak the same language, it's a challenge. I remember my husband was headhunted because he was in computer business and people really wanted him here. And so it was the days when Nortel had lots of money and they'd bring everybody in and we'd be great. But when we went through the immigration process in the UK, they said, oh, we really want your husband. We love your husband. You're a teacher? Ugh, we don't want you. A very discouraging thought of coming to Canada, but we did persevere. And so when we came, and yeah, like many immigrants, I struggled to establish myself as a teacher. And I didn't have the language challenges. I spoke English, okay, with a British accent, and I used those odd words like, you know, boot instead of trunk and everything else. But it wasn't that bad a challenge. It still took me a huge number of years to establish myself. You know, doing all the things that we tell our immigrants to do. I had a degree in European history, went back to university and did Canadian history, became a substitute teacher. I have now taught every age, from 2-year-olds to, I think 90 is probably my oldest person. Year after year, getting a job, substitute teaching, your contract runs out, you start again. That sort of discouraging feeling. And then I remember that I met someone who, well, my husband came home from work one day and said, oh, I saw this woman today and she did this fantastic presentation. And it was all about working with new immigrants. And so that was how I got my step into the door, because I did what we tell every new immigrant to do. So what do you think I did? Volunteer. Well, she was actually smarter, because I was really trying at that stage. So I thought I might get a job. But I phoned and said, can I come and talk to you and find out what's going on in your organisation? And yeah, the person who interviewed me was extremely smart, because she said, why don't you volunteer with us? And so yeah, I volunteered and sure enough was able to establish myself and started working for her. And at that stage, she had, the school that she was running had a LINK program. And so that's how I became into the LINK environment. My background training, I went and did some second language qualifications and things. And so I ran a LINK program for about 8 years. With the administration there. And then after that, I went out and did it on my own, not teaching LINK, but teaching ESL, working in the workplace, doing cross-cultural training. I had the fantastic opportunities to train every Canadian soldier and UN soldier who left Canada to do peacekeeping duties in the world. So cross-cultural training for many years. But part of that was, again, that understanding of how important language and communication is as we come together. And as assessors, how we're looking into using language. And even today, I do more workplace training than I do link, but looking at language and assessment as key. So today, in this part of the presentation, I want to talk about what is assessment, what I see, what are Canadian language benchmarks assessments specifically, and what is going to happen in the future. The rest of my sessions throughout today are actually information gathering from you. So this first one, I'm going to do a lot more of the talking, but for the other sessions, I hope that you will share. If you're not able to join me at any stage today of anything I'm going to talk about, I'm A Senior, the old lady at language.ca. I want to hear from you, okay? So this is your opportunity to share. I'll make sure I'll give you cards and everything else so that you can talk to me. So, for many of you, you hear the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks, and I want to tell you what it is. Well, what was, now it's IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada, but way back when they were Citizenship and Immigration Canada, they put their feelings and their strengths behind having national standards in Canada. And so this was way back in 1993 that they started having consultations about the benchmarks and talking to everybody. Anyone else apart from me around in 93 when we started? Yeah, a few people of us when we started looking at what we should do with national standards. And then in 1999, it was decided that there should be an organisation that supported the use of the standards in Canada. So the CCLB was developed. And so now we are recognised at the centre as being the centre of expertise in support of the national standards in English and French. The centre is bilingual. I am a great example of passive bilingualism, so feel free to speak to me in French. I understand perfectly. I can read and write French quite well, but I learned my French in England. My accent is terrible. Like so many of our learners and our students, I don't like speaking it because I feel embarrassed and uncomfortable. So again, empathizing with our newcomers, that it's a challenge. And no matter how much I teach and how well and how confident I want my learners to be, deep down inside, I know that I'm still not confident. And so English and French, so yeah, feel free to use either language, but I will probably respond in English. And so these were the centre and expertise for the national standards. And again, thank you, IRCC, but thank you all, because we're all taxpayers. Yeah? So they may be national standards, we may say they're IRCCs, but I always say they're ours, because we're the taxpayers. And I think it's fantastic that we have these standards in English and French. A couple of years ago, I was presenting at TESOL, the International Conference for Teachers of English as a Second Language. And people were just so amazed and so happy that we had these standards. And they said, people particularly from south of the border said, wow, you guys have something that is so fantastic. So really, really good. Key words in there, of course, second language proficiency of adult immigrants. And the standards were developed for adult immigrants. We're currently trying to explore ways of seeing whether they may be applicable to slightly younger age groups. My own personal feeling is that 14 to 18-year-old group might well fit into the benchmarks because there's so much of an overlap. And when I look at working with Syrian refugees, I think about who are the people. I have a family I sponsor, and who are the people who are doing the interaction with the social agencies for their parents, who are the people who are helping their parents settle, who needs to fit in with their peers. And so I think that the benchmarks really would support that 14 to 18-year-old group, but there's no research yet. So for adult immigrants and prospective immigrants, the benchmarks are referenced in citizenship laws. They are referenced in pre-arrival. So the English version is the Canadian language benchmarks. The French version, and now you're going to hear my accent, Niveau de compétence linguistique canadienne. Important point for any of you, who works with the French benchmarks and French assessors? Great, fantastic. They are not a translation. And that's, I think, again, really important that when the standards were developed, it recognizes that there are different needs between the English and French communities. So the benchmarks are not translations. They are based on the same theoretical framework, and everything that is developed corresponds to each other. So whenever we talk about it, if you're doing an assessment, you can understand it's the same strength, the same rigor behind the French and the English. Okay? The Centre promotes their recognition as fair and practical, reliable standards of second language. And they were developed to be used in the education, training, community and workplace settings. As you heard, I'm racing off at the end of the day to Halifax because I'm going to the conference for the Canadian Association of Regulators. And that fact that now the benchmarks and les niveaux de compétence linguistique canadienne are used a lot more in regulatory bodies, in workplaces, and so much more of a scope than was ever imagined. So CCLB is a small organization in Ottawa. There's actually only, we have a variable staff because we're project-based. There's about 10 of us. And I'm a consultant, so as I said, I'm the jack of all trades. I go in and do all sorts and leave. But they are always happy to help. And they have developed standards frameworks. So when we talk about the Canadian language benchmarks, we have to remember that these are not tests, these are not tools, they are standards or they are frameworks. So that everything we do is based on our national standards. And so the actual national standards are the Canadian language benchmarks, the NCLC, the French ones, and the literacy standards, which are actually in English and French as well, the ESL for all and the NCLC FLS for AMA. And none of those are translations of each other. So then the centre develops support documents to go with it. If you're in teaching, you will have probably become very familiar with the support kits, the new literacy support kits, develops resources, the can-do statements. Any of you who are referring your clients on to employment-based programs may want to use as well the can-do statements for employment. If you haven't seen them, do go to them. They're quite useful. We also have other workplace tools, such as, what do we have? The I've forgotten the name of the work resource kit. It's gone out of my head. There is a book, a great book on workplace. There's the It's Essential website, which is Workplace. So lots of resources there that you can go to and pick and choose. 99% of what we offer is free. Free because our funders fund us to do them. We develop and offer training and so that you again can do face-to-face training. We do a lot of online and web-based training. We love to support things like this. I think this is fantastic that you guys have this. In Ontario, we had a very similar one for 2 or 3 years. The Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration funded it, and it was great. That was the Ontario one. The opportunity to talk to our peers was fantastic. Now, for the last 2 years, they've made us do it online, electronically. It's useful. It's not quite as good, okay? The face-to-face and what you'll get out of talking to your peers today is fantastic. We benchmark occupations and tests. One of my major roles is I go out and do a lot of occupation-specific testing. Driving in from the airport last night reminded me that the last time I was here, I was doing a lot of work in Winnipeg, benchmarking audiology and speech-language pathology. So if you have a hearing issue here, I probably can recommend one of the hearing centres. I've visited them all, okay? And we came up with a benchmark which is used for that. We developed then occupation language assessments. When we benchmark, we go in and we actually sit there and we listen and we take notes. When we do an OLA, we use published documents like National Occupational Standards and things. So an OLA is really useful, but it's not quite as precise. We answer questions, and we answer questions all day long, and some of them are really challenging questions. Some of them are from new immigrants who simply need someone to talk to. They simply don't know where to go, and so they contact us. We'll get calls from all over the world. On Friday, I answered a call from Pakistan. I'm glad IRCC is here. We always keep talking to them that for some reason on their website, people still confuse CCLB with CLB. And so from all parts of the country, world, they'll phone in and say, okay, can you help me? What do I need? What tests do I need? What does the benchmark mean? So we'll do that. We advise funders. We try to work with them. So I'm on one of IRCC's committees, the Newcomer Language Advisory Body, and we develop assessments: formative, summative, low stakes, high stakes, and placement. Okay. So, you see the different kinds there. Formative, what's formative? I'm sorry? Where you're starting, almost a bit ongoing. Anyone else? What's formative, really? Sorry, yell at me. Exactly, helps you plan. Formative is really what you're teaching and checking up on where your learners are and what you need to teach. So formative teaching. Summative, what's summative? Post. Well, it's the end of it, right? You're checking up that they've got it. So formative, you're learning to do it. Summative, checking up. Low stakes. CLBPT, okay, exactly, because it's for placement. If it's a low stakes test, it means that you can change your mind, you can adjust. We're not all perfect, and so if you're placing someone into a class, you can fix it if you've not quite got it right? Because we all know that an assessment is what that learner is doing on that day, at that period of time, and there are many factors that influence that. We all have bad days. I felt so sorry for my learners because I went through this the other day. I'm getting older, as I keep telling you. And I had one of these tests where they were doing cognitive impairment tests, right? Well, they were asking me to remember things. But they had supposedly done the test. The test was booked for 10 o'clock in the morning on the telephone. So I'm all geared up, I've had my coffee, I'm hyper, I'm fine. Okay, they forgot. They phoned at 7 in the evening after I'd had a glass of wine. Okay? So wasn't quite as good remembering as perhaps I had been earlier. So then when we think about when we're doing tests, it's a snapshot and it's a placement. So if our client has performed better than expected or less well, and they're placed in the class, the teacher can adjust, the program can adjust. So low stakes. If you're doing high stakes, then what does that put you into? It could be professional. What else could it be? Citizenship is high stakes. It's a decision that would have strong impact on a person's life. Whatever you're doing, that test result might mean you're not eligible to come to Canada. It may mean that you're not eligible to take citizenship. It may mean that you can't enter into your selected profession. So we do all of those, and we do placement tests as well. Okay? So this is where I get to the headlines and the good news. Okay. And we're in the process of working with IRCC and with the Centre for Education and Training to develop 2 new tests. First one will be a new placement test, and it will replace the CLBPT and the CLBA, and it will be developed. If you know both those tests, they're both placement tests. And it will be developed between the 2 test developers, and so that you will, in the end, ultimately have a new placement test. And at the moment, we're tentatively calling that the CLBPA. And so after the break, where it says CLBPT, it should be corrected to PA, because that's the one we're going to talk about. After the break, anyone who stays and chats with me at that stage will be giving me some input into what that test is going to look like, okay? And I'll give you a little bit more detail. So that's just starting. We're just actually wrapping up our negotiations with IRCC. They've told us the fund is in place. They've seen our plan. So there's just some little details to go. And 2 weeks ago, we got some great news from IRCC as well, that they are funding our new literacy placement tool. And I'm expecting that to be completed, finished out there by April next year. So that's where we're having to really scoot to try and do that. And it maybe we're in pilot or field testing. So it means that there will be a new literacy placement tool, because the issues with both those tests before were that they were not aligned with the revised Canadian language benchmarks. Okay? So we always had that issue with the CLBPT and the CLBA, that as assessors, and there was some conflict between the assessor and the placement because they weren't quite right. So they'll be totally lined up. What will happen with those tests will be that we will be taking the best features of those tests and listening to you. So if you say things that, I can throw out some of the things in the assessor. When I use CLBPT, I'm still not sure, for example, about synonyms. What do I accept? I'm throwing out, my big bugbear is listening a test of memory, or is it a test of listening? Okay, and so those are some of the things as an assessor that really get me. So we'll be looking for your feedback. What do you find? And so if you're staying with me for the rest of the day, that's what we're going to really be doing, is what will help us. We can't design the test. There's always constraints around funding and what the funder wants us to do. But as assessors, what will make it easier for us and allow us to feel more confident about our results. Literacy placement test. There are 2 tests out there right now. The one, again, done by the Centre for Education and Training. And that, to me, has a lovely feature, if you know it, because it has some of the tasks in the learner's first language. And so, again, what we're hoping to do when we build the new version of the literacy placement is to, again, take the best features. What would help you as a literacy assessor really find out what your learner needs? So the rest of the day, as I said, in those meetings, a lot of it is going to be you sharing with me and sharing with each other. Okay, so I have a little prize quiz that I'll work out afterwards what the prize might be, but how many Canadian language benchmarks and NCLC, that's the French tests, are there actually around at the moment? Okay? So your tables, see which table can come up with how many tests are there. So we've got a couple there. We've got the CLBPT and the CLBA. How many currently exist? Take a guess. Okay. Okay. Okay, who won? Which table wants to... okay. Which table wants to try and prove yes? 7. We've got 7 there. Any answers on 7? 6? 5? Off? 12? Okay. Our funders at the back, do they know how many there are? 7? Okay, let's have a look. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's not 9, 10, 11, 12, and the new one coming up. So who said 12? This table here got it. Okay, so we have to find something for this table. Okay, so 12. Amazing, right? And as assessors, I know as an assessor, I tend to just use 2. I use the CLBPT and I use the LPTs. So I use the 2 placement for literacy. But, wow, 12 CLB NCLC tests shows just how far we've come, right? So what does it mean to say that it's a CLB aligned test? Okay, so we've got back, it's a national standard for adults, in use for over 20 years. The actual first version of the CLB was in 1996. So that gives us a huge amount of credibility. Okay? The French version and the literacy versions, they follow the same theoretical framework, as I said. So as an assessor, I am really, really happy that my assessments are based on something that have a solid theoretical basis. That I can stand up and say that they are defensible tests. Okay? There may be areas I don't like about them. I may query myself that there are some things that are not working, but they are based on a defensible standard. And they are competency and task-based. The whole idea of the Canadian language benchmarks is this idea that they are based on tasks. It's what a learner can do. And it is on what they do in real life and what their skills are. So when we say it's a CLB-based test, it means that it has to be aligned throughout. And so that was the problem with the existing tests, that they were not completely aligned, so that if you were having to defend your opinion, if you're using one of the higher stakes ones, perhaps for nursing or something like that, it might well be challenged in a court of law because it wasn't developed on the existing theoretical framework. So we need to make sure that everything is. CELBAN is our high-stakes assessment for nursing, and I can assure you that that one has been correlated against the revised benchmarks. So if any of you know anyone who's taken that test, it's legally defensible. Okay. So here we have our tests that we now know that we have 12 of. And I divided these into the 2 test development groups. So we come from the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks, and so we have those tests. And you will see that the WLA is our workplace language assessment. We have the French ones, the BTC. We have milestones, which is our high-stakes test, okay? And I know the next question everyone's going to ask me is what's happening to milestones, and I will defer that back to our funders, okay? It was used for program evaluation. I will just say that as with any high-stakes test, test development is one thing, test administration is another. It is very expensive to administer a high-stakes test because you have such high degrees of security that have to be involved. We should all be very cognizant of assessors, that we want to keep our test as valid as possible. And I'll be sharing this one afterwards, but, you know, I did a little bit of Googling just before I came here, just to see where we are. There's a beautiful little online article that I'll be using after the break, but it says, taking the Canadian language benchmark test with a touch of the forks, Winnipeg. Anyone seen this one? I just Googled it. It tells me everything about the CLB-PT test that I actually want to know if I was a test taker, okay? And some valid complaints about it. So test security is a huge issue because we know that you take a test like the CLB-PT and we might say to our clients, don't share it, whatever. In normal conversation with people, things emerge and come out and, well, how long was the writing part? Oh, well, it was 30 minutes. Well, what did you have to do? And you can see it emerging without anyone consciously saying that they're giving away a test, right? And that's why it's a low-stakes test. We do, as assessors, try our very best to tell people not to share, but it happens. But if you're doing something that your livelihood or your future life depends on, you really want to make sure that that's as secure as possible. So when we do milestones administration, there's a lot of processes in place. It is a reliable test, so we hope it will be moving further. CELBAN at the bottom is our nursing test, which is a high-stakes test, and which, again, has every element of security built into it. And as an organisation, and we fund another organisation to administer it, they do a fabulous job and it's really tough. But last week they had to phone CCLB and say, sorry, we have detected that an assessment conducted in one of the Western provinces last week was probably compromised. There were 6 people that actually gave pretty closely identified answers in the writing section. And so test security is a huge issue. But those are our CLB ones. On the other side are the Centre for Education and Training. There, I won't say now, they used to be our competitors, they're now our friends, okay? Because when they developed the very first test, so that first one, the CLBA, was the first placement test that was developed. And so they started the test. That's the lengthy one. Anyone use that one? Yeah, a few people. It's a great test, but it can take a long time to administer, right? They actually say it can take up to 4.5 hours. Okay? And so it's a very comprehensive test, but it depends how far you're taking your client. So that was why then we were funded to do the CLB-PT, because it was going to be a shorter version. So that takes up to it takes about 90 minutes, right? Then we at CCLB developed a literacy, they developed a literacy. So there's duplication. CCLB has the workplace language assessment. TSET has the ELTPA, which is another workplace assessment. So there's some duplication, so now we're working with each other to try and minimize the duplication and to try and find a better way of making sure that the tests are not as onerous and not as costly, and that they work together. So both CCLB and TSET are working on the 2 new tests, so that it will be one test that meets needs. The last one there is the CLB OSA, and it's on the other side as the NCLC AEL, which is the online self-assessment, which is it's a very low stakes test. It just is something that a learner can use for themselves to find out approximately where they are. So we're going to result in a new test that's going to happen very soon. So this is the difference between the CLB-PT and the CLB-A. Okay. And when we talk about the risk of security, look at that number. We're doing something like 40,000 total assessments a year. How do you keep 40,000 people from talking about their assessment, right? So it's very widely exposed, and that's why we have to do new versions. And part of the money when you're developing a test all the time is that doing new versions, updating, because it really is very difficult to not have it compromised. Okay? So you see the difference between the 2 tests. So hopefully that's going to take a bit longer to develop, but 2-3 years you'll be seeing a new test. Literacy, again, the two differences between the 2 tests. I love, as I said, the CLB for LL. If you've been used to using the TSET test, they've just upgraded there slightly. But I love the fact that it has a task, at least in the learner's first language, because what happens if you have a learner and they don't have any English? How do you make that decision without having some way of checking it out? Okay. These are the workplace ones. Who uses these? Does anyone use them? A couple of people. They are out there and they're quite useful, but unfortunately, they're not as widely used as they should be. They're used for placing people into bridge to employment programs, particularly, or for workplace. And I really like them. I use them a lot. If I have a training program with a settlement organisation, for example, where they're doing bridge to employment, something like that, that's a good level. You don't start, the assessment goes from 6 to 9+. And then here are the 2 high-stakes tests, and you have to be certified separately to do both of these, okay? Because they require very high degrees of training. Okay? CELBAN is a very exciting one because it is one of 2 tests accepted in Canada for registration into nursing. So this is an extremely high stakes one, and it is a Canadian language benchmark 1. You either use CELBAN or you use IELTS. So the nurses, and what we hear from the regulatory bodies and the nurses is that they actually like CELBAN because it's very related to Canadian culture, Canadian nursing language. IELTS tests general academic language. CELBAN actually puts it into the nursing context. So we've had lots of great feedback on that, and this again is something that south of the border they're looking at because they don't test English language south of the border for nursing regulating. And so they keep looking at this and saying, oh, you guys do. And especially because all the nursing regulation happens from the States. Canadian nursing regulators, nurses are accepted for regulation from an office in the US. So Canadian nurses have to demonstrate their language and US nurses don't. But it is very, very widely accepted. And these are the online self-assessments. You don't have anything to do with them at the assessment centre, except it's good to reply and tell people about them. Literacy, we're going to talk about later today, and I really need your feedback. So I'm just looking how I'm doing, because I want to give you some time to talk. When we're developing a language test, I want to just talk a little bit about what we do so that you know how we start the process. We have to think, why are we doing this? What do we want to test? How much is it going to cost us to develop the test? That's the biggie. Piloting. And then protocols, security protocols. And one that we haven't really talked about yet, but which will have to come, is assessment training, assessor training. How do we train? What's different? CLBA assessors. How long training did you have? 5 days. They've now reduced it to 4, but they get 4 to 5 days, right? CLBPT training. 1 day, right? 1 day plus the extra pieces of info. But that's quite a significant difference in assessor training, right? 4 days versus 1 day. So we have to think of what is the optimal amount of assessor training that someone will need. Can we do it face-to-face? Can we do it some sort of electronic interaction? Then we have to think about test administration, recognizing the test and legal ramifications, yeah. As I said, we have to decide whether the test is defensible and at what level it has to be defensible. So I just mentioned IELTS as a test for nursing. So how is a language test different to other tests? Okay? Now, if I'm testing history or another subject, then I have a list of facts and things that my students have learned. If I'm testing language, then I'm really having to look at how someone can use that language. So it's much more of a test of communicative competence. And I love that first example, okay? If you say to your friend, oh, you're looking thinner today. Now, what's the context of that? Know your friend's been on a diet and is going to be really happy if you say that. Or someone's not too well and is not going to be quite as happy. If you're a doctor, again, it can be two things. You put your patient on a diet for their health, so looking great. But if there's a medical concern, it could be serious. So when we're doing language assessment, we look at that interaction. We look at how our learner, our client is using language. Are they just repeating it? And it comes back to me to that question for CLBPT of is it memory or is it actually listening? Because I think I'd probably do less well if I'm actually having to remember word for word what someone says. I think I'm much better at, and prefer to be seen to be able to interpret and to understand, but that's something we'll talk about. And how do you as an assessor make that somewhat subjective decision about someone's language? If you're doing a test such as math, it's right or wrong. But if you're doing language, then you have to make those evaluations as an assessor and work out how someone's doing. Sociolinguistic context may increase problems. Looking at where our client comes from, okay? I work a lot in the workplace, and I had to do a language assessment of one of my clients, and he came from a very indirect culture, okay? And we're doing some workplace language training, I'm doing an assessment, and I'm asking him to say no to his boss. What would happen? It was extremely difficult. We were working on this, and I'd identified it in the assessment I did, and we talked about it. Fortunately, I placed him into a language class where he had all his peers, and he was their team lead. And their feedback to him was vital, because they said, if you don't tell Jordan that we're overworked, then, we're all going to quit and leave. And so the stakes for this guy suddenly became a lot higher as well. And so the sociocultural aspect of it was us in class working on how you say no when it's very much of an issue for you. I do joke, and this is totally true, that sometimes as a teacher I can go too far, because we worked very hard on this, and 3 weeks later the class came in, 6 of them, and said, "Great! Tan told Jordan yesterday that we couldn't do overtime on Saturday, that we were too stressed, too busy, and he'd have to hire someone else." And so everybody was really happy. His team was delighted. He got it. I was back in the company a year later, and I was walking down the corridor, and the VP of the company came up to me and he said, "Oh, Anne, I've got something to tell you. And before I tell you, I'm going to tell you it was perfectly great. It was fine. It was the right place, the right time." I said, "Okay, what?" He said, "We had a team meeting yesterday, and Tang, my student who was having problems, stood up in the meeting and said, 'You guys are all wrong. This is what we should be doing.'" I went, he said, "No, it was right. It was fine. It was a good place." So, sociocultural, and we'll go back to whether we learn it or not, but it's something that really can impact on how someone performs. So when we develop a test, we have to keep things in mind. This is very crowded, but you can see that as we develop a test, we have to make sure it's free of political, religious, or sexual connotation. We have to make it pertinent and relevant. There's nothing worse than trying to give a test to somebody who says, "Why am I doing this? What does it mean?" So it's got to be pertinent, relevant. So it has to be contextualized. It's got to be clear, objective, consistent, easy to understand. We are talking to people we're testing language. So if we can't write a test that's not clear and easy, then we're failing in our job. Culturally accessible, sensitive to candidates' needs, competency-based, and we have to give candidates, this is the idea when we do language training, we do assessment training, and as an assessor, we talk about always this bias for best, this idea that we give our clients the best possible opportunity to demonstrate how well they can use the language. And we also set up the test in a way that includes formatting, font size. I haven't gone into the idea of accommodations here, but when we're developing a test, more and more we have to think about this idea of accommodations and how do we be as inclusive as possible for our stakeholder groups. Currently working with a school board in Ottawa to develop benchmarks for the deaf. which is a great and interesting project, and how we work with the testing around that. But I was saying we have learned that, deaf interpreters charge $150 an hour in Ottawa. May vary, but that puts a huge, significant dent in a budget when you're trying to give a fair assessment, right? So we have to think about that. Has to be efficient, easy to use in a range of settings, and it's got to be flexible, enabling the administrator to use the project, terminate the project if it's not going well. How do you bail? How do you give that client that soft language, that soft ending? We don't want to make people unhappy, right? We want them to feel as positive as possible. So the test has to allow you to do that. So here's a sort of synopsis of it, and we're now pulling together our development process. And one of the things I wanted to make a point to, if any of you are interested in being part of the team at any stage, contact us. Test developers are skilled people. They really have a great mind. The psychometricians are totally strongly trained in stats and things. But they do need input. They need guidance. They need support from actual assessors in the field. Particularly right now, I'm researching, there's a call on the CLB website for people to work on the literacy placement test. If you're at all interested, join in. We'd love to have you. Okay? So you'd always have the skilled guidance to help you, but we'd love to have you there. When we're developing a test, the challenges are that it's still going to largely influence curriculum. And so when we're developing this, it's slightly different to doing a high stakes. We have to look at how it might influence what's going to be taught. The CLB describes learners, not roles. So, at CLB4, a learner can do. And so we have to move that round into a test. The tasks in the CLB document are illustrative in nature. So they don't have the precision for a test. Many are integrated, and descriptors require exemplars. So when we're developing a test, we have a lot of thinking to do, and that's why it's a lengthy process. It really is. We have fantastic, as I said, test developers, and I could never do it. I do help, but I don't do it. So, I've taught for a long time. We have about 15 minutes for break. I'd like to give you about 10 minutes at your table to see if you can think about some big picture development. Sorry? Yeah, I am a wanderer. That's why I've got it set up for later. I'd like you to think about some big picture questions. What are the biggest issues you're seeing in the current assessment landscape? What's bugging you the most? What's working, and what are the gaps with tests currently in use? And any promising practices you want to share. So can we take 10 minutes in a group? I know there's a lot there. We'll be picking up on them throughout the day. But if you have anything that's really burning, there is a notepad and there are pens on the table. And I have multicolored pens as well and multicolored paper. So if you have anything in your table you really want to get out there right now that we can discuss throughout the day, can we take 10 minutes to join together and see what we can do? If you want bright paper or bright pens, I'll come and give you it. Okay. I know the buzz through the room is that there's so much to say, and I think that's fantastic. Now, I know we didn't give you a great deal of time, but these are discussions that I want you to continue throughout the day, thinking about it. If you're in my sessions, that's great. If you're not, get them to me. You can email. Does anyone have an outstanding one that's really bugging their table right now that they want to share? Anyone really? Yeah?
But about the listening and memory, we did have a discussion, and it has been discussed by you. Oh, thank you. Okay, we think what we discussed is very important and outstanding. So that's why we're going to share them. There could be a repetition, like where listening to assessments are concerned. As you mentioned, it is often a memory test, and so you're going to do something about it, and we are happy about it. So we're going to start with the positives, and then the other is the writing assessment. The number 3 topic that people have to write on when we are, as assessors, assessing them, the assessment levels jump in 2s, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. We often feel we wish there was a number in between.
Yeah.
And so we consult each other and say, since that number in between is not there, which way do we go? So that's why we would like it to be more precise if possible. And the speaking assessment, our group thought that at higher levels when we are assessing speakers, if we could have more questions that are given to us than being subjectivity becoming playing a major role. So if there could be some more questions to lead questions for the assessors would be helpful. And now comes the question of CLBPA. And this is something that we are happy that finally this merger is going to happen and there'll be one assessment, because from the Saskatchewan point of view, we've had a lot of problems in recognizing what recognition does CLBPT have for college admissions and in opposed to CLBPA, CLBA. So I'm glad you're merging it. But we would like, along with it, some more points that are stressed on recognition. How it is going to be recognized, and let that process be fair and enable learners not come as a barrier. Because we find that about apprenticeships in Saskatchewan, they will accept CLBPT. Admission to basic ed programs, they will not accept often CLBPT as an assessment level of a learner. That we give as a final assessment in the progress report, they will not accept in some programs. So what will be the recognition, how it will be recognized, what program? I hope there will be adequate consultation about it. And the last point is literacy assessors, so that those who can assess literacy levels. It should not be an option. It should be compulsion. Everybody should have it. And why we are told that this literacy assessment will be available tomorrow or this month, if you can't, join. It's not a question of option. It should be everybody must take it. And that's why we are here thinking we'll get the literacy training here from Great Plains College, and we made it a point, and we find this is not the venue for it, so we have to make sure we get it. We are very concerned our assessors don't have this training.
Thank you. I think that was perfect. And you will have a chance to give me more of those during the day. I think those were a lot of concerns that a lot of people would have. Any other outstanding quick one? Anyone? I think you did cover off an awful lot. Actually, got most of them, I think. But yeah. Please get me during the day and have the chance as well if you're in the sessions. I know I talked a lot, but I think this background, I hope, will give you a little bit on what to happen and what's doing. So there are some follow-up sites here. And as I said, anything at all, there's nothing to, no stupid question. So asenior@language.ca and some websites to help you. So I know that we're right on time, so we have one first door prize, right?